Colleagues, good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming to inevitably the most exciting event of the day. I am thrilled here to be on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly to talk to you about tech and innovation, young people, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Lisa Kerbiel. I am the head of the Joint Sustainable Development Goal Fund, which is hosted by the UN Development Coordination Office, and is a part of how we hope to change or bring a step change to the UN for investing in the future, investing in the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. I am thrilled to be joined on this panel this afternoon by 4 esteemed experts, advocates, and champions. And it's really a great moment for me to be with so many Kenyans at the table, having just left Kenya after 5 beautiful years. So karibu sana to New York. And I'd like to first introduce His Excellency Minister Joseph Mucheru, who is the Minister of ICT for the Government of Kenya. Thank you. Applause welcome. I'd like to also welcome Wanju, who is one of our youth advocates coming all the way from Njoroge, who has a lot of expertise in working right on the ground with kids and bringing them onto the grid. Wanju, you are most welcome. To my left, we have Carson. Carson, another youth advocate who spends his time bringing knowledge of Indigenous peoples and his own people to be captured, to be understood, and to be made into even more lessons learned and best practices, especially in agriculture, but other areas that are around his lake region. And finally, Mr. Per Knutsson, who joins us from the UN country team in Kenya, so based in Nairobi, who's leading an amazing platform that's really leveraging private sector investment into the Sustainable Development Goals in Kenya. Per, you're welcome. So colleagues, we have about 45 minutes together with this wonderful audience, this engaging audience, to really learn about the Silicon Savannah and how what's happening today in Kenya is really an example to so many countries in the world, how the Sustainable Development Goals are becoming a channel for action at all levels, from youth people to senior level government. So Minister Mucheru, would you please start us off with some thoughts, reflections on progress to date and the vision for Agenda 2030 and even Kenya's vision for 2030.
Thank you very much, and good evening and afternoon, everybody. It's a great time to be in Kenya, and we have a great leadership. Our president and even the opposition have come together and have really committed to driving the country in development agenda. Our country for a long time has been focused a lot on politics, and that has not allowed the kind of concentration we're now seeing as far as development is concerned. Key and at the heart of the development is the youth and technology. So we are fortunate as a country to have a Ministry of ICT, and this means that the technology and the development required to move our country forward is at the heart of all the blueprint that we're putting in. Vision 2030, the President's Big 4 agenda, alongside the SDGs, all aim first to create jobs and dignified, meaningful jobs for our young people. And these are in many different areas. But first, our president has requested that we focus on, manufacturing, where we can now see, with technology, not only in terms of value addition for all the produce that we have from agriculture, but also in terms of consumption of electronic devices. So we're looking at manufacturing as a big area. We're looking at affordable housing, because without housing, we are unable to be able to ensure that our workforce is able to work. With housing, we're able to create thousands and thousands of jobs, as well as ensure that we're taking care of our environment, being able to give everybody the different kinds of jobs that they require across the whole country. We have 47 counties, and in all those counties, we plan to have these houses built. We have food security as another major area that we are focusing on, and under food security, we're looking at ensuring that we have food that is available, affordable for every citizen across the country. We've been facing drought, water shortages, and in many ways, if we're able to invest significantly in this area, we will see that our youth are going to be able to have both food, and health, which is the last area that we focus on, ensuring that we have universal health care for all our people, our citizens. So we have, through the National Health Insurance Fund, a way to ensure that everybody is covered and they're able to receive health services anywhere within the country. So there's investments in technology, in managed equipment services, but more importantly, as a government, in order to be able to provide these services and ensure that everybody gets services wherever they are, we've registered every citizen. We've done now 38 million citizens biometrically, being able to give them now a digital ID. We call it a Huduma number. That will allow us to be able to service every citizen wherever they are in a transparent, in an open way, and in an auditable way. So technology is at the heart of many of the things we're doing. We've actually just completed our census process, which happens every 10 years. And for the first time, we had an electronic census where we've now collected a huge amount of data that can be used for planning, for ensuring that we're able to meet all the SDGs for our citizens. I can talk about many things. On the digital side, we're providing education and skilling for all our kids, free primary education, free secondary education. At the same time, we're digitizing. We've provided standard 1 to 4 with tablets. We're putting in labs for them to have computer access to all the systems. And we've put all the content online, amongst many, many activities that we are going through. So maybe that's an overview I can give. If there are any questions, I can go into more details. Thank you.
Minister, that's an excellent overview, and I think the Big Four agenda is very well aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals, and it positions Kenya very well. Maybe just one quick question before I pass to Wanju around partnerships and how you see the role of engaging in innovation and the private sector, which is very active in Kenya, how you see that helping facilitate some of these areas of the Big Four.
Thank you. That's a great question. And in fact, I was going to raise that we cannot do this as government alone. This is something that we've been doing with the development partners, with the private sector. And in fact, in terms of job creation, this can only be done through the private sector. So as government, we're ensuring that we've put the right policies in place to ensure that private sector is able to make the right investments and that the policies we've put will be able to sustainably allow these businesses to grow. Last Saturday, we actually signed an agreement with the UN and Rockefeller and SIGA of Berkeley University. Actually, Stanford was there. All of them, Philips were there, and it's an SDG acceleration lab that will allow many of the innovations, many of the products and programs that want to be rolled out to be jointly done with the US government, Kenyan government, the United Nations family, as well as the private sector and education sector, so that we can see a collaborative effort and growth. This is in line with many of the other hubs that we've got established in the country, whether it's iHub. We have as government what is called the White Box, where innovations are also brought. So we're putting all this together, and we hope we will see huge development and one that is concentrated. Thank you.
I actually have one more question.
Yes, go on.
So I think I heard that you worked for this very small tech company before you joined the ministry. What was the name of that company?
It's called Google.
Oh, Google. Yeah. That's the one. That's the one.
Right.
So having worked for Google, and now you're inside the ministry, how does it feel? How does that merge in reality, right? Because many of us know Google as a verb. What does it mean inside Kenya? What does it mean for you being inside government?
I think it's twofold. One, I think you cannot get more private sector than Google. They are way off, and they, in many ways, keep off government. And government is obviously the other side of bureaucracy. So it's very interesting to have a mix of both and to be able to know what are the hindrances that maybe private sector trying to engage with government, what were the problems, how can we resolve those, and at the same time as government, how do we begin to understand the private sector. And so I can say it's allowed me to have a very clear view of how we can have these engagements. And so looking at the technologies, the opportunities that are there, and then the networks that I was able to build, both in the private sector and now within government. I think there's a lot of collaboration and opportunities that allow us to be able to leapfrog and move really far.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Love that. Wonderful, Minister. Let's leapfrog over to Wanju. Wanju is an advocate that comes to us from the place where we don't know Google, where girls and boys are growing up perhaps without that access to the grid. Wanju, you've done some amazing work with young people. The slides are showing us some of that work right now. Can you tell us a bit about what you do, but also why you do it?
When I first came into the room, the first thing that I saw is Act Now for People and for Planet. And the first question that came to mind was, which people are we acting now for? Because 70% of Africa's population is still in the rural areas. And I would request us to look at that photo. That is in my village. I'm a child of a village called Kafaru in central Kenya, or Nyeri County. And these girls are seeing a laptop for the very first time. You can see from the way they are struggling with opening the laptop. Now, this particular picture, they are looking for the button to switch it on. So when I see us saying we are acting now for people and for planet, the question that comes to my mind is, which people are we acting for in the context of Africa? We are saying we are not leaving anyone behind, but let us go out of Nairobi, for instance, in the context of Kenya, and ask them, do you understand, do you know this animal called the SDGs? How many will say that they know what SDGs are? When we talk about technology and achieving SDGs through technology, who are we talking about? Is it a select few who have the privilege of being in such a room, or is it the majority? I think that is what inspires me every day, because I am here seated on this panel because I got an education. So every single night, I ask myself, how many more girls will have the opportunity that I have had to sit on a panel with my very good minister of ICT? And this is a question that must keep us awake every night if we are to achieve the SDGs. Yeah, so
Excellent, Wanju. So tell us a little bit more about those girls in that picture, and what does it take? I mean, there's many obstacles, right? ICT doesn't happen with a flip of a switch, right? There's a lot of issues of infrastructure, there's a lot of other issues. What have you learned by staying close to those young girls? What have you maybe perceived to be some of the bigger obstacles?
So the previous speaker, and I liked what he said because he said SDGs are ambitious, and we must be willing to be ambitious. The minister has said that they signed an agreement to have an accelerator, an impact lab in Nairobi. But the question is, why Nairobi? Why not Kisumu? Why not Mandera? We must be willing to take such risks and reach the people who are at the grassroots if we want to achieve the SDGs. And I started this project because, it's actually very easy. You will be surprised. So we start by taking our laptops. I will tell a few of my friends that we are going to have an ICT literacy class. So let us carry our laptops and go to the villages. So we charge our laptops and we go to the villages. Something else that has enabled this is last mile connectivity that has connected several schools in the country to electricity. So we go to the village and we allow them to learn. First, to just discover that there is something called a laptop, there is something called ICT. There is more to life than what they experience every day. So we arouse that curiosity. After this session, we were funded by the leading telco in Kenya called Safaricom. So they gave us 10,000 USD, but we had to raise 10% of the 10,000. The community had to raise 10% of the 10,000, which is 1,000 USD. The school, which is Kafaru Primary School, has a stoned room that they were not using. We converted that into a library and an ICT center. We just enhanced security, ensuring that there are metallic doors and windows for security purposes. The community had raised the 1,000 USD, and they did it in 2 days because this is a process. So we start with mentorship. We bring all the stakeholders of the communities that we are working with together. That is the community, the teachers, and the students, so that they understand why it is important for them to educate their sons and daughters as well. Then after that, we move on to addressing the need in the area. In this case, it was a library and ICT center. And it is very, very easy for you to do an ICT center, especially in schools that are connected, because you can just buy a 1 by 20 foot container or a 1 by 40 feet container. It is safe, convert it into an ICT center. So that serves the students in the school as well as the community, like on Saturdays and during the holiday. So you're transforming an entire community and ensuring that you're exposing them. You're connecting the unconnected and exposing them to technology. And there are very many willing partners who would come on board and do that. So we have so far set up 3 ICT centers, 2 in Kiambu and 1 in Nyeri County. Yep.
That's fantastic.
Can I answer the question, why not?
Absolutely, even
why,
better.
Why not up country? So first, this accelerator lab is a twinning between Silicon Valley and Silicon Savannah. So we're trying to bring them together. And so many of the, I would say, international businesses, one of the challenges they have is what's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And if they come into the market and they hire people and there's any corruption found, usually the CEO is responsible. So they've been very afraid of taking any major steps in investment. But now coming through that lab, they will be able to have both the American government, the Kenyan government, security that allows them to invest anywhere in the country. You'll be happy to know that our first electronics manufacturing factory is actually at Dedan Kimathi University, and it will be launched before April next year. So we are devolving a lot of the ICT services. Konza is not in Nairobi. We now have over 150 constituency innovation hubs that are all across the country. So there's plenty going on within the country, not just in Nairobi. Thanks. And by the way, I'm from Nyeri as well, so.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Wanju, I can see that your passion is clear, your vision as well. We're here about transformation. The General Assembly is about looking ahead to 2030. So share with us your vision for Kenya in 2030. What does it look like? Tell us what you see when you look ahead with all of this good work, with the commitment of the government of Kenya. What do you see in 2030?
So when you think about the 4th Industrial Revolution, for instance, and Amazon, the Amazon Go comes to mind. So people in Kenya, especially in the banking industry, are losing their jobs because of automated services that no longer require people, cashiers and tellers, you know. So, and I like to look at the Amazon Go. This is a supermarket. It's changed the way we look at supermarkets. So when I think about Kenya, I constantly desire to see young people. There was virtual reality behind there. I would want to see such technologies coming from my village. And I believe it is achievable. We're talking about being ambitious. So it is very, very possible. And the reality is that we are not even ready for what is coming. And unless we are willing and be deliberate about involving the people that we represent and the people where we come from, I don't think we will achieve anything by 2030. So we have to be willing, and I believe that it's possible. And every time I work with little children and I allow them to discover, we allow them to open their own, to discover the laptops, and I see them doing it, yet they have never done it before, I'm inspired because there is potential. What lacks is exposure to what is happening in the rest of the world. So in 2030, I am crazy enough to believe that we will have these kinds of technology coming from my village, coming from other villages across the country and the continent as well.
I don't think you're crazy at all. Do you think she's crazy? No. Excellent, Wanju. Thank you so much. Asante sana. Carson, I'm going over to my left. Carson's an advocate. He's a champion for Indigenous peoples. He's also a storyteller. You're helping people from different walks of life, from different parts of Kenya, learn from their ancestors, but also package those stories. It's very exciting. Can you tell us a bit about what that means in your eyes for the future of Kenya and for the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, part of my daily job is telling the story, like she said. I grew up in arid and semi-arid area of Lake Bogoria in Baringo. but right now, currently, I live in an adopted city called Nakuru. But I am here to explain why we are not supposed to leave anyone behind. Because this is the reason why I'm saying that the challenges of marginalized communities, the challenges of indigenous communities who have age-old wisdom that has been refined over and over for thousands of years, this kind of wisdom and knowledge, the traditional knowledge is getting, I mean, we are assimilating into new technologies, but not retaining the real fabric of that knowledge. So part of my job is to capture short videos, documentaries. I do interviews to the elders in my community who are getting old, and most of them are dying with the knowledge that can be used to combat, to attain sustainable development goals. And as I said, the biggest problem is climate change. And this is compounded by the issue of, for example, land. Land right is something that is so serious to indigenous communities. As you could see, I'm also involved in global governance of youth, the indigenous youth, the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, and as well as Interagency Network for Youth Development. But that is where I get my ideas, the experiences of these communities. How are they tackling climate change? How are they transmitting the traditional knowledge for a sustainable future? So you asked me how I'm doing that. I don't know if I answered well.
You know, it's fascinating when you hear young people acknowledging the role of the elders, because that is a way that will only build on our lessons. Can you think, Carson, of one or two of the people you've interviewed over the years that really stuck with you? Are there any stories you can remember that sort of made you say, "Wow, I'm doing the right thing. I'm in the right job. This is important"?
Yeah. So I would answer by starting, and this is very emotional for me because it has a sentimental value. When I was talking to my mom, when I was growing up, I heard my father talking to my eldest brothers, and he was telling them about not doing media or law because they manipulate the truth. So I studied ICT. Thank you, Minister. But I dropped along the way, not because I didn't have passion for that, but I wanted to do what I've always wanted growing up. So when I say sentimental now, it comes to the stories that I hear from my elders. I have two specific elders that I heard their stories in terms of the climate change and biodiversity and ecological roots that we have to our land. And one elderly woman is around 86, and I have the videos with me. I haven't shared because we're still developing this idea, but we've shared part of it. We're developing with another organization in Sweden. So the issue that he mentioned was where we came from and what part of knowledge that our people had. Most communities in my country still maintain their culture, and I'm really happy, and I draw a lot of confidence in seeing what they do. Like the community where my minister comes from, I really admire what they do. But now the small communities are getting assimilated too. So he was telling me the language, that is my elder, he was telling me the language is getting assimilated, and we no longer speak the way we used to speak. And traditional knowledge is transmitted in the language. And this here is the Year of Indigenous Languages. It's UNESCO Year of Indigenous Languages 2019. And that brings me to specifically why it is much more important to me. And so I encompass all these intersectional areas of SDGs, leaving no one behind, combating hunger, combating climate change, desertification. Yes, so that elder was mentioning the age-old practices of our people, how we could predict the rain. Nowadays, it's shrinking. The rainy season is shrinking, and the dry season is really wide, and we no longer have. We're barely surviving, but we need to. Our government right now has a climate action policy, and it's based on adaptation and resilience. But from my community, is what I think. We don't want to leave anyone behind, including I learned how to speak English by watching a lot of movies. I wasn't speaking like this because I was born and bred in a village, just like my sister right there. But what about the other kids? What about the new generation coming? They're still there stuck. And I'm glad that the government is also making inroads in terms of taking electricity to people. So this will enhance what we are doing, because we are going to establish a community center that will be based on traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Excellent, Carson. Thank you so much. And I think leaving no one behind is a theme that is embedded throughout the Sustainable Development Goals. It's been embedded throughout a lot of the conversations that are happening in the GA next door. And young people like you are going to keep those traditions alive through your work, through your videos, through everything you do. So thank you for that. Per, you're certainly not our least important speaker. You're only our last speaker at the moment. Per, you're coming from the UN country team in Kenya. There's an exciting platform that the team has built. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening in Nairobi right now and how it's going to make a change and accelerate some excitement for the SDGs?
Thank you, Lisa. First, let me pay my respect to my Kenyan brothers and sisters. Hamjambo. Mimi ni furahi sana kufanya kazi pamoja ninyi. So,
Asante.
Twendikazi.
well, at this point with these eloquent speakers, it's quite evident that the transformative agenda is about results. And it's about results for the people, starting with those who are in the dire need. But it's also, as we have heard, results that cannot be created by each of us. There is an African saying that if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to reach far, you go together. And this is really, I think, a proverb that captures the moment which we are in now, because if we want to leverage result and impact, it's about co-creation. We are coming from a situation where we discussed aid effectiveness in the past, making best use of the resources of taxpayers' money. What we are at now, it's not aid effectiveness, it's a development effectiveness. And under the SDGs, we are all developing countries. So we are facing the challenges of the future. And as Wambui said very rightfully, I mean, unless we recognize that 1 million young people are entering the workforce in Kenya every year, but the formal job market is only creating 100,000 to 200,000 jobs. So our collective work is actually to convene and broker the platforms of co-creation that can come up with those jobs that have not yet been created. Now, let me just stop for a second and say, what does UN have to do with this? Now, the UN is a resource to the government, and the coordinator's office, which I'm heading in Nairobi, represents 21 UN agencies. And those UN agencies come with a thematic mandate. It's a global public resource to Kenya. And you could, for a second, you could compare the mandate of UNICEF to a Ministry for Children. You could compare FAO to a Ministry of Agriculture. So in that sense, co-creation can come about if we use the global public resource mandate of the UN to broker the intelligence and the innovation capacity of different stakeholders, and then bringing in UN agencies and global learning, not as a ring-fenced market supply, but as a toolbox of which we can both optimize resources and we can co-create together. Having said that, this is an enormous challenge, and of course that challenge is biggest for the government, and the government is at the lead here. Now, the UN in Kenya have responded to the call from the government now to do business unusual. And what we did 2 years ago in the UNGA here was establishing a platform that brings in, that convenes the leadership of the government, the traditional investors and partners, but then brings in the private sector and philanthropy around basically 3 areas of mutual concern. One is innovation, and when we speak of innovation, since it's such a trendy word, we have to say that's a kind of an entrepreneurship, looking around the corner. If we have in the remotest northern frontier counties in Kenya, for instance, a deficit of health workers, the radicalization or insecurity makes also it very difficult for health workers to be retained in an area. How can we use our collective engagement to create youth employment, tech packs that create a cadre of health workers, like we had the barefoot workers in India serving huge amounts of villages. This is just one example. We could go to the other end of that value chain and say, who would for 5 to 10 years ago think that in the most one of the most remotest counties in Kenya, we would have a center of production of renewable energy? I, who have followed Kenya from Swedish diplomatic service and then into the UN, I would not have believed that 5 years ago. But with a changing perspective, with an interest in the opportunities that are with otherwise poor counties, you suddenly see that the highest wind speeds in the world are in the Bobisa County. And now we have a wind power park created by the government with 30 megawatts into the national grids. My point is, there is no reason why the periphery should stay at the periphery. The periphery can come to the center, and if we then go back to that situation of 1 million young people entering the workplace with 100,000 jobs, shared prosperity of the Vision 2030 and the Kenyan Constitution speaks to our joint responsibility now to bring together the creative capacity and each and every roles and function to leverage development far beyond what traditional project support can ever create. And I'm extremely happy to be part of that. If I may just add one more point, and that speaks to Wambui, you know, why not north? We can do both, yeah? So as part of our strategy, we have used the convening mandate of the UN, and we have twice chartered planes, and we have brought together the governors of 8 northern frontiers counties, together with BBC Reuters, national government, ambassadors from different areas. And then we have taken people places where they haven't gone before, and then we have supported the government and the county government to have roundtable discussions on both challenges and opportunities where they happen. We are planning such a mission again currently, and we want to have roundtables around innovations and water. We know today that 80% of the root causes to conflict and repetitive emergency needs is locked into deficits of water and pastures in these areas. But for a very long time, we have said it's too expensive to bring the water. Now we have to calculate with the current situation in the world by turning that model upside down and say, what is the cost of not bringing water to these areas? And there we have a humanitarian bill of enormous proportions. So if we have a wind park in one place, there could be a desalination project, there could be using the technology of the extractives industry to bring water, and co-creation is at the center. UNDP's role in the accelerator labs will support the government. The Resident Coordinator's Office will forge partnerships with all the other UN agencies to support the Kenyan government to optimize resources and co-create. Thank you.
Excellent, Per. Thank you. I'm going to open up to the floor in just a moment for any questions from the audience. But I love the references to the partnerships and looking really at the periphery and understanding why and where the nexus is. Because I think we often tend to focus on things that aren't always the answer. It's tradition, it's the way we did it before. And I think technology, digitization, the way you can turn around things so quickly is really something that we are about at the UN, and in particular at the Joint SDG Fund. I'm delighted to announce that just this week the government of Spain announced a €100 million contribution to the Joint SDG Fund, and the European Union did as well. And the Joint SDG Fund is a tool to support countries like Kenya, to support countries in Africa and around the world to achieve the SDGs through, again, a step change towards investments, through innovation, through opportunities that give youth those jobs that are so essential. So I think this panel is really representing what we hope to see as change. And I want to make sure that we don't miss an opportunity for a question from the floor, because we have a few minutes left. Is there a microphone? Oh, great. Do we have any questions? Oh, we do. Okay, one moment. And maybe introduce yourself so we...
Hi, my name is Carolina Azevedo. I'm the Chief of Communications and Resource Reporting with the Development Coordination Office. And this is wonderful. I want to thank each of you for being here with us, and now and for the world and for prosperity. But I wanted to bring you back and try to pick your brains and to think through Kenya as a case study. But what would you think are key elements that could be shared as lessons learned for Africa? If we think beyond Kenya, what elements need to be in place to create this kind of partnership, to create this kind of innovation hub that would really benefit mostly youth, particularly women and young girls? What would you think would be key lessons there that could be shared beyond Kenya's borders? Other questions here? No?
Hi, thank you very much for all your kind words. My name is Andres. I am a development practitioner. I'm very honored to hear all your testimonies, but I'm very interested in listening from our young leaders here, because I saw one of the pictures, for example, the figure of the global shapers when you were working with the young girls, and I also noticed that you were talking a lot about the youth networks. So I'm just like thinking in terms of these kind of networks, when young leaders get together behind some objective, and then they pull together with the government and with the international organizations. What has been that role, and how can you see this being a key player also in empowering SDGs based on your experiences? Thank you.
Great. Another question? I think over here. Okay.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Dauda Jabarte. I'm the global head of the SDG Strategy Hub here in the UN. My question is, we've heard the examples of this transformative change and potential in Kenya. How do we replicate that across the continents in Latin America? You know, we've heard about the leadership components, we've heard about the connectivity components, we've heard about the last mile components. How do we replicate, how do we bring those examples to other places beyond, as we said, Nairobi? I was actually born there, so I consider myself part of the panel.
A Nairobian.
Thank you. But I'd love to throw that question back out to you, and to our young panelists, to really reflect on leaving no one behind and who we're doing this for, ultimately. So looking at it more broadly. And I have an answer for your question if you want to talk about it offline.
So I can start first by saying that really the most important requirement is the information, knowing exactly what is the challenge that we're supposed to be handling. So for Kenya, we made sure we have the right information, And with that information shared between different partners and different groups, you're able to easily and quickly align. For Africa, through what we have now, the Continental Free Trade Area, as well as Smart Africa, and the various organizations, we've looked at ways of ensuring that we have common positions that we're taking as a continent, and then you break those down at country level. And when we look at even the multilateral financing institutions, maybe like the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, it's very easy to then coalesce around the key areas. So we know, for instance, infrastructure, whether it is the roads, whether it is electricity, whether it is communications, all that infrastructure is key for every country. But some countries have more than others, so what do you need to do? Kenya needed to really increase our electricity penetration from about 30% to now over 80%. And that was an initiative that we wanted to do, and we rallied all the partners around that kind of initiative. When we looked at food security, when we looked at education. So you set your goals and agree with everybody, this is what you want to do for the country. And so far within Kenya, it has actually worked very well, especially even with the UN family, how we've collaborated. And so it's easy to now take that same model, the way we've created the working groups, having the labs, the sessions where we come together and agree these are the priorities, prioritizing even up to the government budgets, how the government budgets are aligned, how development partner budgets are aligned, NGOs, so that they're all aligned to the same goals. That blueprint can be taken to any part of the world, and I believe it actually work. I would be also very curious to hear from the youth exactly what are the ways they feel we can actually be able to drive this. And I really agree with you on culture. It's critical that we must preserve and ensure our languages don't disappear. Otherwise, everybody will be talking Siri and Google, and we'll be lost in all these accents. So I totally agree with you. Thanks.
So maybe Wanju, we give you the floor for a few minutes.
Thank you. I think it's important to start by celebrating the pockets of success that we have across the country. When you think about affordable clean energy, the pay-as-you-go has radically transformed how Kenyans in rural areas access clean energy. If you think about M-Kopa, for instance. When you think about decent work and the economic growth, tech is transforming how Africans look for work. The informal labor force is being formalized, and this is through the gig economy, and I appreciate the safe border, for instance. So these are things, these are successes that we can learn from, and what have been their successes, what have made them successful. When you think about DG Farm, which is transforming agriculture, they have 1 million farmers under them. So how have they been able to do this? So I think partnership is extremely important, and we need to look at who is doing what under what SDG, and what can we learn from them, what are their successes and what are their failures. But for us to be able to increase this and grow this in Africa, I look at our blocks. We have 5 blocks in Africa, and I look at the East African community, for instance, as a powerful tool that will allow us to leapfrog growth and development across our continent. Because I don't think we can do it across the continent. I feel that East Africa is unique, Western Africa is unique, Southern Africa is also different. So when these individual regional blocks are able to work on their own, then they come together, then we'll have, I believe, growth across the entire continent. Somebody asked a question of the Youth Leaders Network. I have to appreciate the Global Shapers community. I became a which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. So I became a Global Shaper in 2015. At that point, I was doing whatever I do on my own. But being a Global Shaper allowed me to meet like-minded people who are hungry for change, not just in Kenya, but across the globe. And I remember when we went for the first mentorship program in Kafaru, they had to pay their own transport. We had to raise money to also buy books. We were starting a library, and we didn't have any sponsorship. So we collected old books, magazines, and newspapers that did not have any pornographic material, and that's what we used to start our library in the rural area. So I feel the youth networks are really, really powerful in helping achieve the SDGs. Because especially if they are of like-minded people who are focused on seeing transformation and development, who are focused on achieving social change, I feel those are very, very powerful tools in reaching the people who are the grassroots. Because this is not something the government can do alone. And I challenge my cabinet secretary, because they're very young and diligent people. I make reference to a report that was recently released by the Mercy Corps on the gig economy and the potential that technology has in creating employment. And the team that is leading that is a group of young people. And if you pay attention to what is happening globally now, the climate strikes, when you look at the women revolution of the Sudan, again, the young women were at the forefront of that revolution. Young people are aware of the social challenges that are facing us. And they are willing and are doing so much in achieving change. So I feel that the youth leadership networks are very, very important, and they should be included in the movement, and because I believe this is a movement of change and transformation.
Thank you, Wanju. I'm going to hand over to Carson. I'm conscious of our time, so I'll hand over to you, Carson, for some reflections.
Yeah, quickly. I will answer one thing that Caroline asked, and part of what you can pick from Kenya is there's a Swahili saying that young Kenyans use, and also my brother was born in Kenya. They say, kujituma, and those Kenyans who are here would understand that. It's informally saying volunteering yourself. So that has made Kenya to be where it is right now. And even my minister can agree, because he comes from the tech world where there's solutions. Kenyans have solutions that you've never heard even here. Really powerful, but I mean, it's powerful in their own nature there, because people have expressed, themselves to solving the problems. And government cannot do that alone. So, because we don't have much time, here's another takeaway for member states and other stakeholders. They can work together with the communities to share knowledge and listen to the source of this, to the source of this knowledge, which is really a powerful, rich indigenous knowledge. And we can tap and develop a framework that respects free, prior, and informed consent. In my country, they usually call that public participation. So, Minister, please, let's action that and make sure that it really includes the real people, because sometimes that doesn't happen to the young people. And the chiefs in our country would say the young people don't come to these forums. But I can just let you know that young people would respect free, prior, and informed consent, because they wouldn't want to share their technologies if they don't understand the framework that is developed on, and including even the generation, the indigenous knowledge. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. Per, a few closing thoughts? The Kenyan example and how this can be taken global. This snapshot in this case study is also reminding us of the global perspective for the SDGs and how we can replicate these good practices.
Well, maybe just to bring us back to last Saturday, when we formed the relationship between the Silicon Savannah and the Silicon Valley under the leadership of Cabinet Secretary Mucheru and Rockefeller and Berkeley and others. I would like to leave us with that picture, because when I said that the SDG goals, in contrast to the MDGs, made all of us development countries, we have to look at the planetary framework from a country perspective. We have to look at shared prosperity from a viewpoint where we are not receivers or providers, we are co-creators. And it's fantastic, I think, if we can start to prove examples whereby not only South-South, but North-South is not charged with political tension, but rather than, charging it with the finest minds and the most relevant thoughts. And doing that, I would also like to remind us of that innovation, the greatest innovations in this world, did not only come from the elite. We do not know from which corner the best innovation comes, and diversity has always been the cradle of innovation. So I would also like to support it. It goes for Kenya, it goes for Sweden, that the approach of inclusion, of co-creation, and also acknowledging the richness of diversity is going to bring us forward. Thank you.
Excellent. And on that note, I'd like to thank our esteemed speakers, Minister Mucheru, Wanju, Carson, Per. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to the best audience ever in the SDG Action Tent. And we really appreciate you tuning in to this segment. All the best towards 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals.
And great thanks to our moderator. Very well moderated, Asante. Thank you.
What an incredible day. Thank you, guys. It's okay, we're all about the love here in the SDG Action Zone. I love how excited you guys still look. What an incredible, incredible, incredible day. We went from financing for sustainability to gender equality to education to all these amazing technology conversations, including a visit from Bill Gates. You can cheer for that. What can I say from there? I'm Nadira Hira. This is the SDG Action Zone. We love you, live stream audience. Keep posting using the hashtags for People for Planet, Act for SDGs, and SDG Action Zone. And we will see you tomorrow morning starting at 8 a.m. for a look at small island states and an awesome end to this super week of SDGs. Have a great night.